Hurricane Fiona moving away from Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. The center is, but they're still not done, especially in Puerto Rico, as bands of rain continue to come up from the south. Next stop, the Southeast Bahamas, Turks and Caicos Islands, and in the longer range, possibly Bermuda and Newfoundland, or perhaps even eastern Nova Scotia. We'll be talking about that. There are hints that maybe another system might be on the maps at the end of the week or this coming weekend. We will discuss that. And of course, while all this is going on, autumn is about to arrive in the Northeast, but not before we deal with some thunderstorms, perhaps. These and other incredible tales will be discussed tonight on the Joe and Joe Weather Show. Brought to you by Omni True Value Hardware at 1226 North Wellwood Avenue in West Babylon, serving the entire New York, New Jersey, Connecticut tri-state area with everything you need to make your home look great, your home work great, and your home protected in case there's some adverse weather like thunderstorms or a tropical storm and hurricane or a hurricane. So make sure your generators are working, you got your pumps going, and if you want to make your yard look great, mulch, topsoil, and just about anything else you need. 631-756-1125 is the telephone number. And the website is
OmniTrueValue.com, as if you didn't know.
Yes, 20 to 30 inches of rain in Puerto Rico. They're still not done yet. This actually, Fiona took the worst possible track that it could take as far as Puerto Rico is concerned with regards to the winds. I'm sorry, with regards to the rains. Because it moved south of the island, crossed into the western part, the center crossed to the west, and went into the Mona Passage, and it's just been crawling along. So all the feeder bands, all the moisture coming up out of the Caribbean over Puerto Rico, they're still in that line there where they're getting heavy downpours coming up from the south. The Dominican Republic, of course, getting hit with the center actually on land. I have to tell you, Joe, I looked at the loop this morning. I'm going to try and see if I can get enough frames on the loop to do this. But when I looked at the loop this morning, the eye of Fiona was clearly inland in the eastern part of the Dominican Republic, and it was so intact. I was really surprised. The circulation over Hispaniola did absolutely nothing to cause this system to weaken. It just maybe weakened ever so slightly. Now it's on its way. It'll probably be a major hurricane before too long.
It is usually the case that when they pass over Puerto Rico and especially the Dominican Republic, Haiti, that the mountains, the very rugged terrain, usually rips the system or shears it to some degree and causes it to lose a lot of strength and potency. But not so with Fiona. Fiona certainly holding on to all of its potency, especially in terms of the amount of rainfall. It certainly is, big surprise to me how much rain has fallen on the island of Puerto Rico. And last I heard, Joe, the most, if not all, the island still out of power and not likely to regain power for a good number of days to come.
Yeah, it's going to be really tough because they're still going to have feeder bands there overnight. They're on the radar, which we'll get to momentarily. But I'm getting this loop up here. So you've got the radar loop there. So go ahead. There's the San Juan radar, and you see those. It's gotten a little better this evening, Joe, from what I saw, because earlier the whole island was covered.
Yeah, and now it looks like at least they're getting some breaks, although look on the final few frames of the loop, the northeastern portion of Puerto Rico still getting hammered with a narrow, albeit concentrated line of very heavy rain. So it's not, Yogi Berra would have said, it ain't over till it's over. And apparently, in the case of Puerto Rico, it ain't over just quite yet. Maybe a few more hours in portions of the island, but now it looks like the storm is going to be, or at least the bands of heavy precipitation are going to be moving on to the west and northwest away from Puerto Rico. And I'll at least give Puerto Rico a chance to try to recover from what turned out to be a very damaging Sunday into Monday.
All right. In the meantime, I've got this. I'm trying to get this loop loaded with a whole bunch of frames, so it's a little bit difficult. But I'm doing the best I can. So let's see. Excuse me for the white flashes. They are annoying, believe me. All right, I'm going to see if I can do this my way. Right there. Okay, so right there on the first frame, you can see the eye of Fiona. Now it's right inland. And the IR can be very deceptive. It can be deceptive because it's not showing. There's probably was some low clouds that filled in because once you go to the visible, you could see the elements of the core of that eye was still visible, although it's filled with clouds. But the thing is, in spite of the rugged terrain, and the most rugged terrain is really in the central part of Hispaniola and going into eastern Haiti. But nonetheless, systems do tend to get distorted here to some extent, but the core of this system and everything else that was going on in terms of the dynamics more than compensated for the fact that it went over that island. And now, as we look at the latest picture, this is the latest IR picture here, well-defined eye that right there. And there's been thunderstorms, and we've been looking at these the lightning flashes here on the loop, which I'm going to try to get it to move now without getting all those annoying flashes. So all late afternoon and evening, once the eye moved back out into the Atlantic, you could see thunderstorms bursting, the lightning strikes bursting right around the eye. Very evident in the last few frames there.
I have a long wave infrared image, which shows the eye very, very well, and also showing the outflow and also the areas of convection, which show up as bursts of deep shades of blue or dark shades of blue. If you want to take a look at that,
it's up there.
I mean, here obviously is the eye. It is now apparently north of the Dominican Republic, but look at all of this activity just swirling, and the shades of dark blue. Those are the cold cloud tops, and you can see the very last frame of this loop shows that the last of this is seemingly moving off the west side of Puerto Rico, and again spinning away to the north. It looks like the motion, Joe, we start from here and then continue up to here. So I would say the motion is something along the lines of 340 degrees northwest. And wow, that is quite a storm. As I said, usually when these systems interact, especially with Hispaniola, where the mountainous terrain usually on many occasions I've seen just tears apart or at least shears a lot of these tropical systems. But apparently Fiona didn't really get too ripped up here. I mean, and now it's anticipated that by the time we get to late tonight or tomorrow, it will be probably a Category 3 storm. In fact, now they're talking about the storm even reaching Cat 4 on its way northward.
Wouldn't surprise me. Would not at all surprise me if it wound up getting that high. We do have a reconnaissance aircraft. And let's see how far into how far the obs are here with the no, still not enough. This hasn't updated in a while yet, so I'm going to just see if I can flip back to sometimes that graphic takes a while to update. And on the so they're getting to the point here where they're getting into the center, Joe, or closer to the center. So the planes reporting, on this one report just now, roughly just now, about 8 minutes ago, with a 60 knot wind. They haven't plotted the pressure yet on the graph, so we'll come back to this. So at least so far we've got a 60 knot wind, and with respect to the Hurricane Center's 5 p.m. forecast, where they were carrying a 20.1 north or 69.8 west, top winds of 100 miles an hour, and a pressure down, I believe, to 972 millibars. We'll have a new advisory within the next 15 minutes or so They're carrying northwester 315 at about 10 miles an hour. You'll notice that on the forecast, a couple of things. The H's and the M's are all tightly clustered. And the Hurricane Center does have this as a major hurricane by tomorrow afternoon. And then it continues to turn a little bit more to the north on Wednesday, but it's going to move very slowly. It's not till Thursday, really, that it begins to accelerate out in the open waters of the Atlantic. So the next question, after we have hurricane warnings up for Turks and Caicos Islands. We have tropical storm warnings up for the Southeast Bahamas. The warnings for Puerto Rico are done, although there are still some heavy rains that could be going on overnight and into tomorrow. The problem is, Joe, that northerly track, the northerly component of the track is still lined up where Puerto Rico is going to be getting into some of these bands, probably, maybe not the entire island, but some areas are going to get more rain tomorrow and even into perhaps early Wednesday.
I see on the chat board a very interesting comment from David Rico. And David Rico says, well, looks like this season's a bust. No storms to hit U.S. And I'm kind of intrigued by that comment. Does David Rico want to have a Category 4 storm hit any part of the Atlantic seaboard? Would he like to see some destruction along the lines of what has just hit Puerto Rico, hit one of the United States? He says this is a bust, Joe. This is so far.
See, to me, those are honestly, I find those comments silly on a number of levels. One is we've been talking about the fact that in terms of the number of storms, it's subpar, okay? But you deal with what's in front of you, and it's like when the people who declare that the winter is over at the end of November.
Right.
It's in a sense, it's along the same lines. Weather doesn't work that way. And I think you made this point yesterday about the fact that things can change on the fly.
Turn on a dime.
Right.
Turn on a dime. Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
And a light switch gets flipped. And I will tell you that, I mean, I usually, I don't really go too crazy when it comes, with stuff to the long range. You always take it with a little bit of skepticism. But I have to tell you, I think just from the standpoint of another system developing, I think there will be one that's going to develop in the southeast Caribbean late this week, and it may wind up being something that eventually gets into the Northwest Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico next week. So, since it's far from being done, and and again, nobody wants a tropical storm or a hurricane to come on shore. I get what he's saying as a weather person. If he's a weather enthusiast and he's you get excited by all this sort of stuff, and that's at one. You have to remember to keep that at one level, and then remember at the same time that someday you may be someday you may be a homeowner, or maybe you are a homeowner. You don't want a hurricane blowing your house down.
I will say that Joe and I, back in the 70s and 80s, we were very much into storms, and we were very much saying, why is it that we never can get a major hurricane to, affect our vicinity, our part of the United States? And we were very excited in 1985 when Hurricane Gloria did indeed come straight up toward us. In fact, I remember one long-term weather discussion in advance of Gloria saying, they had the storm track taking it right up toward Long Island and southern New England, and the discussion said, why back away from what looks to be the most potent threat since Donna in 1960? And boy, we were very, very excited by that. But you know what, Joe? As you just said, a few moments ago, you and I are a lot older now. You and I have homes. We have kids to look after. You have to worry about the possibility that there may be. I don't think I was ever more frightened when I was leaving to go to work at News 12 just prior to Sandy in 2012, 10 years ago. and I still looked around. I'm surrounded by 50, 60, 70-foot trees. And I just said, I'll be willing. I've made a deal with God. I said, God, if you don't have one of these trees slam down on my home or cause a problem for my wife or for my children, I think I'll gladly give up 4 or 5 days without power, as opposed to having a major hit from one of these trees, courtesy of Sandy. You don't think about these things when you're in your young 20s, and maybe you're not married, and maybe you don't have kids, and maybe you don't have property or whatever. But as you get older, as time goes by, your philosophy and your overall thinking changes. And so, to me, this type of hurricane season that we have right now,
It's
why it
fine.
may have been boring, to us, why it might have been frustrating to us back in the 1970s or early 80s or whatever like that, I'm very happy with the way things are going right now.
Oh,
And
I
if
hear
all
you.
of them are and if all of them are Fionas and all of them are fish storms that will not have any impact on my home or your home or anything else, let it be. I do not want to see, and I don't want to see on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell or on NBC or CNN or MSNBC. I don't want to see pictures of a Yugo devastating Charleston or hitting the Mid-Atlantic shore areas or the Outer Banks of North Carolina with death and destruction. I'm done. I don't want to deal
Yeah.
with that kind of stuff. So
No, no,
anyway,
you from a weather standpoint, look at what's in front of you. Okay, you don't wish cast, you don't hope cast, you don't really root cast, except if you made a forecast you want to make sure you get it right, and that's a different story. But you don't wish cast. And all you need is to spend, you mentioned about Sandy. I spent that night on Long Island in my house listening to my house moan and starting to think, are the walls going to suddenly blow out?
exactly.
So you don't want to do that. All right, let's get back to let me get me out of the screen here. Let's get back to Fiona, and I will.
And I agree with Tommy. I agree with Tommy Groh, by the way. Fiona ain't a fish storm. Bermuda will tell you that later this week. But the interesting thing about Bermuda, and we've said this more than once, that you could throw a 40-ton Mack truck at Bermuda along the lines of a Cat 4 or 5 hurricane. And I don't know what it is about Bermuda, but literally, maybe 1 or 2 weeks after the storm has passed, you can go to Bermuda and it looks like nothing had happened.
Exactly.
It's
they all get out there. It's
very resilient.
It's that resilient British type attitude. It's a British island. It's that British attitude. They very resilient. They go out. They do get on with it. They do it. It's happened. Let's fix it. Let's move on. And that's a good philosophy to live by. Always go forward, never go backward. And by the way, from a weather standpoint, Fiona is fascinating because it's combining with a former typhoon out in the Pacific, whose name I couldn't pronounce when it was out there, and I don't remember what the name of it was.
Congolia.
Whatever, right? But whatever it was, they're both are big players in altering the weather pattern, beginning late this week and going into probably all of next week into the beginning of October. Okay, so although CPC's forecasts of above normal temperatures until further notice are not going to work because of these two tropical systems. So there's always impact either directly or indirectly as far as our weather is concerned. And the Hurricane Center is tracking this, taking this just northwest of Bermuda, maybe just far enough northwest that the core goes west of Bermuda, and then on another turn more toward the north as it approaches the Canadian Maritimes, and it looks like maybe western Newfoundland. Well, not western Newfoundland is where they got the age. It could be the European has it in eastern Nova Scotia. The GFS has it in western Newfoundland. By the way, we should give credit to the GFS model because it actually has been a lot better with this than the others. It's gotten the intensity better. It's gotten the track better. And it was the first one to kind of put this idea that we were going to see a major hurricane moving out off the East Coast the way it is. And, people always criticize the GFS because, against the European. Well, guess what? Didn't work this time. And the GFS has been winning more of these battles in the last year than the European has. Here are the intensity models. It's not often you see that half the intensity models make this a Category 4 hurricane, and the rest of them a Category 3. So the intensity models are all on the same page. And in terms of the hurricane forecast tracks, there's a bit of a wider spread in the longer term, but it's still Eastern Nova Scotia or Western Newfoundland, somewhere in there, or maybe split the difference and it goes right through the Bay of Fundy into Labrador. But folks, I think in Newfoundland and in Nova Scotia certainly should be paying close attention to this, because with this deep trough that's forming in the northeastern part of the United States, it's just going to pick it right up and punt it up the East Coast.
Right. And, people say, wow, a hurricane or for a tropical cyclone for Newfoundland or Nova Scotia, but they stick so far out east in the overview of North America that this is not unusual. I mean, they certainly have seen and will continue to see the possibility for tropical systems. This one looks like it's going to be particularly robust, however. I mean, it's going to diminish some as it moves over the colder waters, as it moves toward Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. But make no mistake, this is going to be a very, very potent system for them at the end of the week and into the weekend.
By the way, you can see I have the upper air here for southeastern Canada. So we have this trough that's moving through here tonight in the northeast. That is helping to actually give Fiona a more northerly component of motion, but not enough to pick it up and kick it out to sea. It has to wait for the second trough. Now, you see what happens with the second trough as it dives in late this week into the northeast and into southeastern Canada. It sharpens up quite a bit. I mean, that's a fairly sharp upper trough there that's running from Labrador on southward to off the coast of southeastern New England. So you've got a south-south, very sharp south-southwest flow up the East Coast. And the reflection of Fiona is this thing, okay? Right here. That is Fiona. This is and here's the axis of the upper trough, which actually goes negative tilt. You wonder, Joe, whether this could get some baroclinic in a place where it would normally start to weaken. You wonder whether it could get some baroclinic energy out of a trough like this and be a bit more of a powerhouse than advertised. I mean, it's right. Look at in 6 hours. Okay, so in 6 hours, this is Friday evening. At 6 hours, it's at 40. I'm going to just round it off. So let's say 42. Roughly, and about 57. 6 hours later, it's at it's almost at 48 north. It moves 360 nautical miles in 6 hours. It's moving at 60 miles an hour, Joe. There are going to be if this verifies, there's on the east side of this, there's going to be some pretty strong winds.
No question. That forward speed added on to the central circulation winds with Fiona, that forward speed is really going to make the difference and make this a very, very significant, substantial. I don't want to use the word cataclysmic, but my goodness, there are signals here that this storm could really do a number on. We just saw what happened in Puerto Rico. This storm could really be doing a number on Newfoundland, and even as far after it crosses through Newfoundland Island all the way up to Labrador. So this may be one of those really memorable storms. There are a few storms that are in the annals of the maritime provinces, gleaning historic. Saxby's gale in 1869. Many years ago, not too many years ago, but they had a tropical system named Juan, which actually later on that winter, they had a similar storm, coastal storm or nor'easter, which dumped a lot of snow, and they called it White Juan.
Right.
and we may be looking at another classic, historic storm for the Maritimes. I hope there's not going to be too much damage there. I've been to Nova Scotia. I've been to Newfoundland. Heck, I was on a cruise, and the mayor of Bonavista in Newfoundland was there to greet everybody. So happy to see the Americans, coming to visit our country. And of course, there's a Broadway play, Joe,
Yeah.
Come From Away, where the people in Gander welcomed all of the people who had to fly in when all the aircraft were being grounded right after 9/11. These people who live in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland are wonderful people, and they really do not deserve what may be coming their way for the end of the week or the start of next weekend.
Yeah, I was just noticing, by the way, in terms of the pressure, and I was just going back to the possibility of, as it starts to make its transition over to a post-tropical system, the pressure actually falls on the GFS. I mean, it goes to a 950 when it's just northeast of Bermuda, which kind of, okay, well, that's nothing. I mean, that makes sense. Then it's 946, 939, 934.
Wow.
Now I would normally look at this and say, okay, that's skeptical, but you look at that upper air and you have to wonder. I mean, that's a powerhouse. Now it starts to, this would be in the wintertime. You'd wind up with like a 960-ish low up in Canada, and we'd be blowing away with 40 to 50 mile an hour northwest winds and wind chills and snow showers, because we wouldn't have gotten the snowstorm, but that's a whole nother story. But anyway, you see how, I mean, it just really just kind of swallows up the upper feature, and it becomes this powerful post-tropical cyclone. So, and the thing is, it's not just the GFS that's doing this. I mean, we could look at the European, which is pretty much, it's actually, the European is left of the GFS, and even the European, wait, this was actually the European went to a little bit to, here it goes. Okay, it was weird. All right, there's the European. The European is left. It actually dives the bottom of the trough off the southeast of Cape Cod and cuts it off, and then you see this wrapped up upper low that goes up into Nova Scotia. Just want to see how deep that is on here. I mean, even on the European, okay, it's not in the 930s, but it's a 947. It gets down to 932 on the European as it's approaching Nova Scotia, and then it just starts to fill a bit as it goes northward. So I guess what it's doing is it gets all the baroclitic deepening done sooner, so that it reaches its peak and occludes, and then it starts to fill. But still a powerhouse that goes up there. I mean, there's no question of that.
David Rico, who I think I may have chased off of the chat board, and that was not my intention. I think he packed up and left after my comment about things.
Nor mine.
But I just want to ask David Rico, if he's still on, is this season still a bust? Why don't we ask someone in Nova Scotia or Newfoundland at the end of this weekend whether or not the hurricane season is a bust? It's certainly not a bust for the folks up there, and for Bermuda. Yeah, you don't want to see this, but the more I look at this, Joe, the more I would be very concerned. I'm sure Environment Canada, that's the National Weather Service of Canada. They call it Environment Canada, and I'm sure they're going to be putting out all kinds of special statements for the folks who live up in that area, the Maritimes, later on in the week, if they have not done already. I'm a little surprised, by the way, that the Hurricane Center, and they certainly have more than their fair share of stuff to worry about right now, but I'm surprised they didn't put out at least a sentence or two regarding sea swells, rough seas, rip currents along the Atlantic seaboard. Certainly, a Cat 3 or 4 storm, even if it's 500, 600, 800 miles off of the Atlantic coast, is going to be close enough still to generate those kind of conditions. And I'm sure that along New Jersey shoreline and south shore of Long Island later on this week. They're going to see their fair share of rough seas, courtesy of Fiona and her effects, acting like a gigantic agitator, if you will, of the ocean, and really churning things up. And again, I'm surprised they haven't made even just a general comment about that for the eastern seaboard. Well, maybe they will after. Maybe they will after it passes Bermuda, but it's not going to be. It's not going to be. I'm sure all the surfers, of course, will ignore all the warnings and advisories and go out there to do whatever they do, but
Yeah.
hang 10 or whatever. But it ain't going to be very pleasant along the shore areas later on this week locally.
Yeah, I think once it gets far enough north that they start paying attention to, focus of attention starts to shift to Bermuda. I think when they getting to the point where watches are going to go up for Bermuda of some kind, that's probably when you'll start to see them mention the wave activity, the potential for some big waves along the mid-Atlantic and up into New England, because it is going to happen. And meanwhile, since I've got the map up, I've widened out the tropical view here so we could take a look at this next tropical wave that has developed in the Atlantic. It is disorganized, but I have to say, from the standpoint of tropical waves, it's not too shabby looking here. It's got a ways to go, a long ways to go for development. But once Fiona gets far enough north, I think it's going to leave a situation where conditions are actually going to be rather favorable for development as the wave tracks on to the west. So maybe by the end of the week or into the weekend, we could have a new tropical storm developing in the Eastern Caribbean, and we'll look at it on the map at the moment. Also, kind of interesting too that here we are at September 19th, and if this were a normal season, if we'd had a normal August, this might be the time where you start to see the waves coming off the Cape Verde Islands. I mean, they still would be pretty active, but before too long, they'll start to calm down. But yet, we do have other tropical waves that are still there. So perhaps everything's, just like our summers used to get, we're always getting extended into October. Maybe that's what's happening in the tropics because nothing happened in August. It's starting to play a little bit of catch up here in September. But if we take a look, and the thing that struck me too about this next wave is the fact that both the GFS and the European are almost in lockstep, and even in the long range, Joe, today they're in lockstep, which is kind of unusual. We're always looking at the Europe, saying, well, the GFS has one thing and the European has exactly the opposite, or vice versa. Well, these two models today sort of wind up at about the same spot, but you can see there's a low, and the GFS actually has this as a tropical storm by Wednesday afternoon. The Hurricane Center is mentioning it in their outlook, but they're only carrying, I think on the new outlook, it's at 20%. And they went 30 and 40 for the system in the central Atlantic, so that may get a name out of the way. But 0 and 30, I'm sorry, so 0 and 30, so a 30% chance in the next 5 days. I wonder if the wave starts to show organization that they might up it. But take a look at this. It has a tropical storm in the Eastern Caribbean on Friday, moves it to the west or west-northwest, close to, almost over Jamaica, into the northwest Caribbean, and then into the southeastern Gulf of Mexico. I'm going to switch to the European because I'm going to do two things. I'm going to switch to the European.
I would say that the European and the GFS being on the same page occurs about as frequently as the New York Jets and the New York Giants winning on the same weekend. Which by the way, happened yesterday.
And add to that the Mets and the Yankees. That hasn't happened since 2009.
Right.
So anyway,
thank you, Leon Lindenhurst, who mentioned he hit Super Chat twice actually. On the first hit, he mentions that Nova Scotia and St. John's, Newfoundland, getting hammered. I guess he is. He made that forecast, I would assume, in the last day or two in advance. And we agree with you, Leon. And also, he hit Super Chat a second time. And he shows, it looks like a a green dancing pair blowing a party favor. But thank you so much, Leon, for
Thanks,
your
Leon.
hints.
The GFS has the European has the system at 26, 7, and 8. I'm just marveling at the fact that both models have it almost in the same spot. 26, 6, and 86, 2. Okay? 26, 6, 86, 2. And the GFS has it at 24, 4, and 84, 8. So they're basically about 80 miles apart, 70 or 80 miles apart. I mean, it's not often that it's rare. I don't even think not often is a good descriptor. It's rare to see this.
That far out. This is what, September 29th?
Yes, that far out. So, look, we're not forecasting that to happen. There are a number of things, and I'm going to point them out here, that are going on that will need to be paid attention to with regards to this. One is on the upper air, obviously Fiona getting picked up by that deep trough in the east. There is another deep trough in its wake that comes through for Sunday and Monday, and you can see the new tropical system in the Northwest Caribbean. That trough lifts out, and there's an upper high sitting over Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Texas. What that upper high does is really important, because if it stays strong, it could certainly build enough that it could get into the Gulf and then turn west. It could do all sorts of things here. Now, the GFS is saying that there's a weakness. If you look at the flow, that's from the Dakotas to North Carolina, there's a trough there, and the ridge weakens enough that it allows for an opening for this system to go into the Gulf of Mexico. And in fact, on day 10, there is this upper trough right here now swinging through the lake. So it's responding to this weakness by doing this. The European is also about the same, which is another thing. Even the 500s are not that different. In fact, the European actually has stronger troughs, which is surprising. Here's the first one that for this weekend, obviously, and then here's the second one that comes for Monday, September 26th. It's a little slower and a little deeper. That lifts out, and then there's another one that drops in right behind it, and you see how the ridge off the East Coast goes one way, the ridge in Texas goes the other way into the Southwest, and that leaves the opening right in the middle. But those ridges are going to be very important, Joe, because if they're stronger than modeled, and that those troughs are weaker than modeled, then you could wind up seeing the system getting deflected more to the west and end up, say, in the Yucatan Peninsula or maybe even into the Southwest Gulf. On the other hand, if this thing develops in a hurry, I'm just trying to see. I mean, I don't really see an escape hatch here for it through this week anyway. I mean, it looks like it's moving right along, responding to the Atlantic ridge that looks fairly strong. So it's going to miss the trough next weekend. So, I mean, I don't see it. I don't see this recurving like this one did. I don't see this turning into Puerto Rico or the Dominican Republic, at least from what I'm seeing right now. I think the ridge to the north is too strong.
Well, Joe, we're talking now about, potential significant events coming down the road more than 5, 6, 7, 8 days in advance. What I think we ought to do is you just concentrate on Fiona for the moment, because whatever Fiona eventually does certainly is going to have a say in whatever comes up behind it. And, then we'll have a much better idea. This time next week, certainly, we'll have a better idea as to what may be coming down the road for the end of September already.
Yeah.
So, but I think you will agree, and I think everybody out there will agree, that from what was really a boring, in terms of tropical systems, tropical cyclones and whatever, it was really a boring July and August, has suddenly really revved up in the past week or so, and maybe this will lead into a very active month of October. We've been talking about how really we don't really buy into what the hurricane forecasters who are still saying that it's going to be an above normal year in terms of hurricane. Who knows? Maybe they know something we don't. Maybe we're going to see a lot of action coming down the road as we move into October.
Well, the way we get to it, the way we get there is if we continue to see these waves coming off the African coast, if we continue to see upper air conditions that are much more favorable for development than what they were a month ago, then yeah, you could have one of these situations where you've got several storms running around at the same time, and all of a sudden you've made up for the lack of numbers that you didn't get during the month of August. Play the cards. We're playing the cards that are in front of us. Just to be clear, it's okay to speculate about what's going to happen going forward as long as you give it context. And that's what we've done. We've given it context in terms of what's going on in the upper air and all the things that could be different when we're sitting here tomorrow at 7:30 Eastern Time on the Joe and Joe Weather Show. Not the show's not over. That was a little bit of a Bob Grant. I don't know. I don't know what some screeching hyena says every day from 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock right here on 77 WABC.
I'm looking at that loop that you have right now on the screen. I'm looking at Fiona and looking at how the eye so well defined, and then all of a sudden it kind of fades and it tries to come back. I wonder if there's like an eye wall replacement cycle that's going on right now.
It's fading, Joe, because this is the lightning strikes, and there are lightning strike a lot of lightning strikes going on.
Oh, okay.
And it's right on the eye wall. So, because if you look on the tighter view, without that, on this wide view, you could see the eye is looks like it's doing fine. So,
yeah.
Let me just check real quick. We'll see if there's anything from the recon. 95 knots. Two measures here of 95 knots. So that would translate to 110 miles an hour. They haven't plotted the pressure yet. Why don't we see if they did anything? Oh, they've got a fix here, 974 millibars. And a lot of wind barbs, a lot of the light purple wind barbs, which are 83 to 96 knots at flight level. We don't have any of the white yet, which would be 96 to 113, but that may that may show up yet as they make the next pass. So 974 was the recon pressure that we're seeing. All right, let's go to local weather here. We have some showers and thunderstorms that are moving right along in eastern Connecticut and into southeastern New England. They pass through eastern Pennsylvania, parts of New Jersey. Did you get any rain late this afternoon or this evening?
Oh, we did. Yes, I don't know the exact amount, but it came rolling on through sometime around 5 o'clock this afternoon. And yes, there was a fairly significant amount that came on by right now. And then in fact, then the sky started changing into a kind of a peach or orange color at the end of the storm. And I haven't had a chance to look yet, but I think we may very well be in a mostly clear right now.
I would say yes. I think you probably are mostly clear right now because the back edge here was pretty sharp, and that's that first trough going through. Much of the weather across the country, actually, it's pretty quiet. We've got a few scattered storms down in Florida, and also in parts of the southwest in New Mexico. There's a tropical storm, Madeline, that's south of the Baja Peninsula. You can see it there on the lower left, and that will be doing the usual Pacific fade as it moves out toward the west-northwest. Here's the radar. Now, this is from a little earlier. I'm going to refresh it in a moment, but fairly solid-looking line of storms developed from south-central Massachusetts across central Connecticut and just kind of skimming through Long Island here. They did have even a special marine warning up earlier and some downpours across New Hampshire, Vermont, even a flash flood warning up in that little green box you see there up in Vermont. Here's the latest shot. Those strong storms, Joe, are now moving a little bit more to the east. Looks like they're moving through eastern Connecticut and about to go into Rhode Island and points eastward. There's actually still some stuff going on in upstate New York around Syracuse, some big thunderstorms there. So the cold front's probably, I have to look at the odds to verify whether the cold front, maybe we've gotten the wind shift, but the upper trough is lagging, so maybe those storms in upstate New York are part of the upper trough going by.
Yeah, I was a little surprised myself. I know that the Storm Prediction Center had most of the activity just to the north of where I am. And in fact, a few of the models, the HRRR and the 3 kilometer NAM from yesterday and earlier today, showed just, some very potent storms, but more scattered than anything else, and staying pretty well out of the picture for where I am. But obviously that did not happen, because at 5 o'clock this afternoon, some pretty good cracks of thunder and some heavy showery rains moving on through the area. And of course, now it looks like, as we just noted, things have cleared away quite nicely.
We've got some showers and downpours scattered around in parts of New Mexico and southwest Texas. We also have some rain moving through central and into northern California, well inland. More scattered showers as you get down toward the coast, and even some echoes showing up between San Francisco and San Diego. There's an offshore low there that has been pumping moisture since yesterday, and that is probably going to slowly begin to wind down. The Storm Prediction Center, this was the marginal risk that they had. They kind of, as the storms have been moving along, they've been peeling away at the back edge, so they're going to catch up to this in short order and adjust it a bit. Also, small areas of marginal risk in Wisconsin and in north central California. We have a small area of marginal risk. Tomorrow, the risk is Wisconsin to Michigan. Western Michigan across back to Wisconsin. Day 3, and this is in time for the next cold front that will be approaching. They've got a slight risk in western New York, northwest PA, northern Ohio. So this would include cities like Cleveland and Erie and Buffalo, and also kind of backing around into southeastern Michigan, which would include the city of Detroit. Otherwise, there's not a whole lot happening in the land of thunderstorms for Wednesday into Thursday. We may get some here Wednesday night with the cold front coming through. And the WPC folks, in terms of rainfall amounts from the two weather fronts that we're dealing with this takes us to next Monday night. Generally a quarter of an inch or less from New York City all the way down into northern Florida, but much more robust rainfalls in upstate New York and on up into central and northern New England on the order of 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches. Also seeing some solid rains in the southwest in Arizona, Colorado, especially in the western half of Colorado, southeastern Utah, northwestern New Mexico, up to several inches possible there. Central and northern California, southern Oregon, and also parts of Montana. So, we know it's going to get cool, Joe, at the end of the week. We've got this big trough coming in, big cold front. I'm thinking that Friday's going to be a real struggle in terms of temperatures.
Yeah, I would agree. And as I said yesterday, with the winds expected to be, steady, sustained at least 20 miles per hour, and there probably will be gusts of 30 and even 40. So it's going to be a rather breezy, if not downright windy Friday. Although it will also be cool in the 60s, but the winds will make it feel cooler than that. And bright sunshine, lots and lots of sunshine expected. Should be a really beautiful, bright day on Friday, if you want to overlook the fact that it'll be windy and unseasonably chilly.
And I think the weekend looks okay. Saturday looks good because the first trough pulls out so fast and the next one comes in. And we got another front with approaching showers of Sunday night into Monday. Actually, the GFS is pretty robust with this second front with some showers and maybe some thunder before we get into another cool high after that. And, of course, you could see on the bottom of the screen, you start to see this next system out of the Caribbean and into the Gulf of Mexico, if that's where it's going to be. Stay tuned. We'll be covering it, of course, whatever developments, if any, during the week. I was going to pull up which map was I was about to pull up a map. What map am I pulling up here? All right, well let's look at this is trough number 1 for tonight, and that goes out. And here's trough number 2. This is the one that picks up Fiona, and you see it there. It actually goes northwest of Bermuda on the GFS, and then it goes up toward Newfoundland, as we showed you earlier. And then as that lifts up, another arm comes around, and here comes another deep trough for early next week. And by the way, does it have another one in the long range? Well, yeah, well, it does try. You know, kind of interesting that we've got to this sort of with these hurricanes, with the how they've really sort of not they sort of they did alter the overall pattern. And if we take a look at the dew points, so the next couple of days, so we get a little bit of a dew point break tomorrow, Joe. It seems into early Wednesday. Dew points down to the upper 40s and low 50s on the GFS. And then they come up a little bit, but not much. Maybe upper 50s to around 60 by Thursday morning. And then the big dew point plunge into the 30s and even the 20s in terms of dew points in upstate New York and in Vermont and New Hampshire. You've got dew points in the 40s all the way down into central Georgia, central Alabama, northwestern Mississippi. And even pushing further south than that as we go through the weekend. So this is a nice dry autumn air mass that's coming down.
It is, except the only problem with it is that most of the leaves are still on the trees, and none of the trees really showing any signs of changing color. And I suspect, again, because of the dry summer that we had, that we may actually see a lot of colors that are more muted than anything else when they finally do start to change. And it looks like, Joe, that might not happen for a little while, maybe not until later October or even in November, at least in the immediate tri-state area.
I have the total snowfall forecast map for North America taking us to the end of September and the beginning of October. And, northern Canada and Alaska and northeastern Canada starting to fill in with some snow. So snow lovers, be patient. Be patient.
Yes.
Wouldn't surprise me.
I'm not gonna add anything on to that. If you're looking for a comment from me for late September about snow, if or as Norm Dvoskin used to say, mum's the word.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so we have at this stage of the game. So Johnny Quest had this question that he sent to me earlier, and was asking, why is it that in the Gulf of Mexico they get big storm surges but they don't get big waves, and in the Atlantic side they get big waves but they don't always get big storm surges. And part of the reason is the fact that when you look at the depth of the Gulf of Mexico, it's got the waters offshore are fairly shallow for a long way. So that just allows, when the storms are coming up and they're pushing up the water, that water goes pretty far inland, and those storm surges get high. Whereas on the Atlantic side, the shelf, Florida, not so much. Florida, not so much in this part of this conversation. But as you go further north, you don't have to really go that far offshore to get into deep water, and that helps the storm surge issue just a bit.
Yeah.
And the other
there you go.
And the other thing is, in the Gulf of Mexico, a storm is trapped in there. So it's got no place to go. It's landlocked. It's gonna hit land someplace. So the water's gonna go all to that one place. Whereas on the East Coast, it's a little bit different. The Carolinas get storms that come in from the southeast. New England and the northern mid-Atlantic states usually don't. Now, Sandy was a big exception, and you saw what happened when you had a system that came in from the southeast and how bad the tidal flooding was. So in that case, the storm surges were significant. But you got to have the tracks. In the Gulf of Mexico, it's just different because something's coming up from the south and heading for the northern Gulf Coast. Somebody's going to be on a side that's going to get a big storm surge, no matter what.
Right.
So that's
of course Sandy. Of course was an anomaly. I mean, how many storms, how many tropical cyclones do you see enter the central Jersey coast from the east? That had not happened in a very long time, even though papers had been written well in advance, a number of years in advance, pointing out that if any kind of tropical system were to take that kind of a track, that would put New York City, and we certainly saw with Sandy, at a major risk in terms of flooding. These things just don't happen very often, but when they do, they can be, almost catastrophic. Most storm systems usually take the regular route of staying off our shorelines and moving from southwest to northeast. Sandy was, again, an unusual anomaly, which we hope we will not see again for a good number of years.
All right, so let's do Briller Jeopardy. The chairman taking some time off, so I think you have it again.
I don't think I do.
You don't? Check.
Let me see. Let me check.
Because I don't. At least I don't think I do.
I will check. Let me check here. Did we do this since 1954? How many years would retired? And yeah, I think we did this.
Oh, we did. You did? Okay. Then I'm
Carol, Edna, Hazel.
Yeah, we did. We did that. We did that yesterday.
And he said, "See you guys September 26th."
Okay, so I guess we don't have a Briller Jeopardy to do tonight. All right. Coming up on 8:30 Eastern Time. So it's been a nice hour-long show. The Joe and Joe Weather Show is brought to you by Omni True Value Hardware at 1226 North Wellwood Avenue in West Babylon, New York. 631-756-1125 is the telephone number. And the website is omnitruevalue.com. Everything you need to make sure your home is looking good, or working well, and prepared to handle any kind of adverse weather. By the way, before we go, maybe you could do this tomorrow because I saw this post. I saw it on Twitter, and I saw you reference it on Facebook. I think from Marshall Moss, Dr. Marshall Moss, with regards to the fifth, what was it? The myths,
right?
The myths. So maybe
15 myths. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe tomorrow, after we're done with the weathercast, we could address some of those myths.
Will do.
Okie doke. Everybody, thanks for the super chat hits tonight. Was from Leon, and were they both from Leon?
They were both from Leon. I don't see anybody else.
Okay.
I didn't see anybody else who would hit super chat. So thank you very much, Leon.
And by the way, if you are watching the show on a replay and you want to hit the tip jar, you can do that now by hitting super thanks. And that is on your YouTube. When you bring up the video, you could do that. Not asking you to, but if you did, it'd be good because that means Joe and I can eat for another day. And I did actually. I had a bowl of the Oat Crunch Cheerios, so I was sort of munching those during the show.
Oh! I had spaghetti squash tonight.
Oh, very nice.
And leftover, and other leftovers.
Awesome.
So there you go.
All right. See you tomorrow. Night, everybody.
Night.